Hey, this is a quick introduction to TouchDesigner. This is going to be great if it works. I'm kind of just rolling with it. This is not going to be many takes and much editing. This is going to be just A to Z, how to get going with TouchDesigner if you're interested in creative coding. And the focus is really going to be on just showing you the minimum that you need to know. There are tons of possibilities with TouchDesigner, but if we're trying to achieve the kinds of things that we do as people starting out with creative coding, then we can ignore a ton of it. And I would say there aren't a lot of tutorials out there that just give you the bare minimum. For example, there are tons of operators that do lots of different things. A lot of them do the same thing. There's like 10 different ways to do everything in TouchDesigner. And it's always a struggle for me to enter into a system like that when I really just want to know, how do I do it? Not how are the 10 ways that I could do it. So I'm hoping that this will be really straightforward that way. So first, I'm going to talk about the interface. The bottom of the interface here, I would say, in my experience, you don't actually need to bother with it that much. So there are times where it matters, this timeline, but for the most part, what we're going to do kind of ignores it. One thing that's super important, though, is if the timeline stops, then everything that you're doing up here will also stop running. And an easy way to make that happen by accident is by hitting the space bar. If you do, you'll see the timeline stopped, and you'll be driving yourself crazy trying to figure out why the things you're changing aren't doing anything. So just make sure the timeline is running if you're doing something. Other things to note are this perform mode. I'll show you that in a moment. It's basically how we get things to show up on screen without looking at the network editor. This is where you work, and the perform mode is typically what you want to show up like on a projector or something. There's also this button right next to it that says Open Palette. There are tons of components in here. I'll talk about what components are briefly, but there's a lot of stuff in here that just does a lot of work for you. So someone has figured out how to make a checkerboard, and you can take advantage of that rather than trying to figure it out from scratch. I would say if you're just beginning, especially for my students, it's not a great idea to just start trolling through here. And what we'll end up with at that point is rather than having the technology serve our ideas, we end up finding something that looks cool and then making a project around it, which isn't really what we're trying to do in my classes. So I'm going to just close that for now. There are times where we want to use that. There also are times where there's really just someone has solved a really common problem, and it's in that palette. You also can add your own components here, and that's a way to take advantage of kind of like being able to reuse things that you've done. Okay, I think honestly, for the most part, I'm going to skip over everything else. We'll get to some of these things that are important in a bit, but one is the help. There's Learn TouchDesigner, which will open the website, TouchDesigner Help. A really important one that I think a lot of people don't know about is operator snippets. So if you click on that, it'll actually open a new window, and all of the operators are here. You'll see what an operator is in a moment, but basically we make networks like this with TouchDesigner to create some kind of audio visual interactive thing. And for any given one of those operators, there's a whole help here. It gives you the information about it, gives you a bunch of different examples. It's kind of extraordinary, and I think a lot of people don't know it's there. So let's move on from the interface. I'll touch on some of those things as we go forward, but let's talk about the operators. So generally, everything that happens here in the network editor is creating a network of operators that are connected to each other by these spaghetti lines. So how do we get operators on here? We can either hit the tab button or double click. And I think I'm just going to tell you one way to do everything. It feels like there's a ton of ways to do anything in TouchDesigner, which can be really frustrating. I can right click and choose add operator. I can hit tab. I can double click. I'm just going to try and lean towards the keyboard when I can. So I'm going to hit tab, and what comes up is this operator create dialog. And we generally call them ops. So there are components, tops, chops, sops, mats, dats, and then in the newer version of TouchDesigner, it will have pops. And these are operator families. They each have their own role. I'll go over comps or components in a little bit, but the first one we're going to look at is the top family. Top stands for texture operator, and this is basically how you make anything happen with images or video. Chops are channel operators. This is when we're dealing with numeric data, whether it's random numbers, it's something coming in from the mouse or from a Microsoft Connect or whatever. Then there are SOPs, which is all 3D stuff. and mats, which are how to make materials to apply to the 3D SOPs. And then there are DATs, which deals with data like tables of information, text files, and scripts that are written in Python, all those things. Custom would be anything that gets added. Normally you won't have this here right now, so we won't worry about that. Okay, so one key thing to know, and again, something that just kind of gets glossed over and forgotten sometimes, is that some of these are darker than others, and those are generators. So they create something from scratch, essentially. Like if we look at movie file in, this is how if I hover over it, I can see a little tooltip on the bottom. It's how we load movies and images, despite the name being movie file in. It's also how we load images. This is another thing about TouchDesigner. It's very idiosyncratic, and it's really a little frustrating to have to just look at this huge list of names. They all have the same amount of importance in this list, right? Like the only way we have to distinguish is whether they're dark or not, but we don't know how much people use something like movie file in versus something like mat. And I can tell you, we use movie file in all the time probably, but mat is one that's less used, but you can't tell that by looking at this. So again, I'm going to try and show you just the ones that are like enough to get started. Let's also talk about, comps. So comps are kind of special. They are used for, we will use comps to essentially encapsulate things that we're working on. So instead of having one huge spaghetti mess in the network editor, we can kind of contain them and drill down into these different operators. And components are a good way to do that. The way that you use ready-made components are often when you're dealing with 3D scenes, or if you're trying to make an interface on screen. So you can see things here like slider, buttons, and those are things that will allow you to have an interface either in the thing that's on the projector or an interface that you could control from here in the network editor that influences what's in the projector. Those are like the most common ways that comps would show up. Okay, so what am I missing? I think we're going to ignore totally SOP and mat, and of course we don't have pops here, but we will talk about tops, chops, touch on comps a little bit, and then a little bit about DATs. Okay, let's talk about the top family. Again, these are texture operators. Textures are basically like images, and one interesting thing is that tops all work on the GPU. So if your computer has a powerful graphics card, it's going to take advantage of that. There are, in all of these families, you'll see that there are the same named things. So there's a select top. There's also, in the chop family, a select chop. And they do different things, which again makes this kind of naming convention really frustrating sometimes. They do similar things, but with totally different data. So what we'll see actually is that the real power, and once you get really advanced with TouchDesigner, is you can go between families. So you can take data that's in a chop format, which is these channels of numbers, and you can kind of move them into a top, which then means that your graphics card is doing the work. So moving between these and translating data, going back and forth between families is kind of an advanced topic, but it's actually where TouchDesigner gets really powerful. So let's talk about some of the basics. Movie file in is one that you are going to want all the time, probably. You just want to show an image. That's how you do it. Movie file in. If it's a movie file, same thing. So in fact, I will add another one. I can probably just do Control C, Control V to copy and paste. And what I can do is click here in this window right here that's appeared. We can see all of the parameters that have to do with the operator that's highlighted. So the first thing is we've got different tabs here. Some of them are the same on all the operators. Common will always show up, but other ones are specific to this operator. Also, this is where you find the help. So clicking here under help will bring you to the website. Let's see if we can get that. That's the website for the movie file in top. It tells you all of the parameters that are there and what they mean. It also tells you, it has links to the kind of basics of tops in general. There's a lot of information here, and I would say this is your first stop. If you're interested in how to use Python with this, then you would click the second one that is the yellow and blue. And this is the same thing. It brings you to the website. And basically for the movie file in top, it tells you how you could access it, access parameters and other information through Python. Okay, other than that, how do we manipulate things that are happening in here? First of all, an important thing to know is, let's add another top just real quick. I'm gonna add the circle top, which again, a very basic one. And in fact, it's more useful than you would think because one of the options is polygon. And so you can ironically make a square using a circle. This is, again, this is what makes TouchDesigner so idiosyncratic. How do I make a triangle or a rectangle? Well, you could use the circle. I don't actually know of another way to make a triangle. So we have options like this where it's just a slider. And then we have options like this where there's a pair of things. So the radius, right? We could have the radius go up in one direction and not the other. If I want to change the radius in general, let's make it a circle again. How do I do that? Oh, how do I make it a circle? I don't know. Do I go to like a really high number? What was it originally? One thing you can do is click this little target sign and it shows you any parameters that you've changed. So you can right click and say reset, and then it'll go back on that. And I'll do the same thing here. I'll reset this one. Now you've got nothing here, but you have to turn off that little target and now you'll see them all again. So let's say I want to change the radius. If I just want to change this, the XY, I suppose is what this is, I can hold down the middle mouse button and start moving left and right. And what it's doing is incrementing and decrementing by 0.1. If I hold down the mouse button and move up or down, now when I move left and right, it's doing it by a different increment. So now you can see it's barely perceptible how much I'm changing it. Again, I can right click here and choose reset and it's back to 0.4. If I wanted to change both of them at once, I can right click or middle click on the radius title and then find the increment that I want and go left and right to change that. They both change at once. Okay, so one of the things that you can probably get if you're trying to figure out how with the idea of creative coding, you probably want to make something interactive, something that's animated, something that moves on its own. These are very static, but you can probably tell already that you can change things like where things are positioned, their other attributes, and that's how you can have things that are interactive or animated. Okay, so let's just move this over. I think one of the keys to TouchDesigner is organizing things so that they look understandable, and we'll see ways to make them even more legible, but it's important because otherwise all the crisscrossed wires will just start driving you crazy. Okay, so back to the movie file in. If I click on this little plus sign, it'll allow me to choose a file, and it automatically brings you in these TouchDesigner samples. Actually, if you go to this samples folder, there's tons of kinds of samples, not just images and videos. But if I double click on nature here, I can open one of these videos and you'll see it works the same way. Now, if there's sound involved, there's a different way. We can't get sound out of this. How do we know? Well, if we look at the left and right sides of these operators, there are inputs on the left and outputs on the right. So this is outputting a top. How do I know it's a top? Well, tops are purple. And this little thing here is purple. So, and how do I know that? Well, let's hit tab again. These are all purple, right? So the color coding is nice. We know that chops are green, tops are purple. So what's coming out of here has to be a top. And if I hover over it, I think it will tell me what it is. If I hover over the input, it tells me what it's looking for, but I'm not sure it tells you, it doesn't really name it on the output. So let's see, how do we get this to show up? Because if I hit perform mode right now, I told you that that's how you show people what's happening on a projector or something. It's just black. So let me get out of there. So let's look again, by the way, at more of these tops. Movie file in, I've said, is a pretty common one. A lot of these are actually, kind of in the same category. Again, there's no way to kind of separate them by category, but you can recognize some of these things from something like Photoshop. Blur, bloom creates a glow effect. Let's see some others here. Edge kind of finds edges in an image. It makes it look like an outline. Emboss makes this kind of embossed sheet metal sort of look. So these are just filters. So a lot of these in the top family are actually just filters like you would find in something like Photoshop. And we can try that, whether it's a video coming in. It doesn't look that great with a video, but let's try it with an image. There's the banana with an embossed look to it. If I want to see the output of any of these tops on the background of my network operator, my network editor, I can click the blue button and that will make it the display in the background, which is sometimes handy. Like here, I'll just press the blue button and now I can see it a lot better. Now, let's say I wanted to actually show this on the projection because still, if I go to perform mode, I don't see anything. So what I need is an out. Now, I can just hit tab over here or do the other ways that I can get an operator show up and find out. Another thing you do though is if you drag out and then hold that down while you hit tab, it should show you only things that make sense. Now here you can see like the chop family, it's a much smaller list because it wouldn't make sense to add any others. But here in top, you can actually add any of these. But let's add an out. Now out is actually what's required for us to see it in perform mode. So there we go. I'll show you more about perform mode, like how to make it show up full screen, but for now, that's good enough. We can see the output of the end result of our whole network. Okay, so if I want to add something in the middle here, I can right click and insert an operator. Maybe there's some other kind of filter. I don't know what let's see what bloom does. I don't imagine it's not going to look that much better. Let me hit the display button here so I can see it. And then I can actually just change the parameters in real time and see what it's looking like. So, what I'm doing is adding one after the other. The output from one goes to the input of the next, and so on and so forth. So that's how we use this. If I hit delete here, it'll just kind of magically keep the connection there. Okay, now how do we put things together? Because this is another basic thing we'd want to do. Here's just the banana going to the out, but actually let's say I want to make the banana, I want to kind of combine the banana and the circle in some way, or maybe the banana and the movie. Let's do that. So what I can do is I will double click, and there are ways to combine textures, and those again are similar to something like Photoshop. You'll remember probably from seeing this before in Photoshop, add, subtract, difference, screen. These are all things that appear in Photoshop when you're trying to combine layers. It's the same here. So again, if we're trying to narrow this list down to unique capabilities, we've got a bunch of these that are filters. We got a bunch of them that combine things or composite images together. I rarely use those because things like add and screen and so on are all available in the composite top. So let's put these two together in the composite top, and you can see this input looks a little different. It's just got one kind of spot there, and this looks bigger. So that means it's a multi-input operator. You can see right there, multi-input. And so what I'm gonna do is drag this to it and this to it, and now I've got the two of them combined together. How are they combined? Using this multiply operation. So here are all the individual ones. Again, we'll see difference and add and so on as their own operators, but we can just do that here. So let's say I do add, that's combining these two. And one thing I could do is if the order is wrong, for example, something like add does matter, but if it's difference, that really matters. So one easy way to fix that is to just swap the order here. I guess it doesn't matter too much in this case. Let's try add. It's not really mattering too much, but we can swap the inputs. Otherwise, we have to kind of reconnect things. Now, to do this reconnecting, for example, I want this to become the output. All I have to do is drag to this wire, and it'll replace it. So let's look at this again. That's what it's going to look like in the projection. And when I click perform, there it is. That's what would show up on the projector. Okay, so let me just show you again, in the interest of identifying the ones that are used the most, or at least when you're starting out, let's look at a couple others. One would be level. The level top actually allows you to change, let's just connect this here. It allows us to change essentially the brightness, the contrast, all of those things. So this comes in really handy, and that's the level top. Another thing is let's actually just make the, let's add this to the compositing. We can have three things coming in here. It's no problem. I probably would reorder them so that they look better. Using the right mouse button, I can highlight things and then I can move them over. So keeping things organized is important. This is a really important thing. That looks like a circle, but over here it looks squashed. The reason is we're trying to combine two different, potentially three, but I think these are the same aspect ratio. But you can see this one is a rectangle, a wide rectangle, and this is showing up as a square. So this is super important. Basically, we need to make sure that these are the same resolution. And right now, if I click on the movie file in and I check common, it's basically going by whatever the resolution of the movie or the image is. If I right click here and hit info, I think also I can use the middle mouse button. It shows me that it's a 16 by 9 image. It's 1280 by 720 pixels. So it's 720p. I imagine this is the same, 720p. So And by the way, with the free version, I'm not using the free version, but with the free version, you're limited, I think, to 720p anyway. So the image, if you have a big movie, you might want to resize it down to 720p because it won't show it any higher resolution than that. But this is, if I click on here, this is only 256 by 256. So when we try and combine these two using composite, this will end up getting stretched because it's, trying to combine with a rectangle. This is one case where using swap order of operation will matter if we have two things here and one is well, let's get rid of the banana. Now the movie is squished, and if I swap the order of operation, nope, sorry, that's not it. If we go to transform and choose the fixed layer. So right now it's input 2, that's the fixed layer. So it's saying that's the correct aspect ratio, smash the other one into a square. But if I choose 1, then it'll go with that one. Either way, it doesn't look right. So let's fix it. That means this needs to be the same resolution as that. And I can go to common here, and instead of using the resolution of 256 by 256, I can click here and choose 720p, and now it looks right. Again, I can make this circle smaller. And that's that. So what else? We've got, we've seen level, we've seen transform. Sorry, no, we haven't seen transform. Let's take a look at transform. So this is a pretty important one. Sorry. What I can do is add a transform right after this circle. So let me just insert an operator, transform, and this is how we do things like rotate, scale. So I can scale from here, even though it has scale option there. I can also change its location here. Some of this is redundant, that we had those abilities in the circle top, but things like rotating, where you rotate from, those kinds of things are also are available in transform. So that is another useful one. And then finally, I'll show you another useful one, which is, let's get rid of the comp here. So we've got this and this and this. And what I want to do is switch between them. I can use a switch top, and this is another common one. If you're beginning, this is something you might want to do. I want to have this, this, and this all be switchable. And I want those to be the thing that go to the level and to the out. So right now it's just showing the first one. But if I wanted to, I can click on switch, look at its parameters, and change the index using this slider. So obviously, it's like most of the slider doesn't help because it's really just going between 0, 1, and 2. Those are the three inputs, 0, 1, and 2. We can also blend between them, which is really nice because it just uses that decimal number and decides how much to switch, which is really pretty cool. Okay, this gets to the obvious next step, which is how can we control these things in an automated way, right? Like how could I make these images sort of fade into each other on their own or in response to someone waving their hands in front of a webcam, all those kinds of things. That's why we use TouchDesigner. So before we do that, I would suggest you play around with tops. Maybe get a movie file in and then filter it through a couple of filters, try and experiment and find things in there that look like Photoshop filters that you've seen. Maybe add another image and do the composite to combine them together and look at the different ways that you can composite things together. Make sure it goes to an out and make sure it's working in the perform mode. Most importantly, make sure you get the resolution right. We don't want to see any stretched images in the output. Okay, I'm going to assume you tried it and pause the video and try it. Now, I do want to show you one other thing. A lot of these, what you'll find is that two different operators can perform the same action by the way that you use their parameters, and that's good. It also means there's a lot to learn. If you just start looking through this whole list of operators, some of them really aren't necessary, and maybe one person uses a certain operator more often than others, but it's really just preference. So this is very different than other environments that I like to use, where it's really like there's one good way to do things. But I get the idea that this has a lot of flexibility. What I would say is if you look in operator snippets, this is where you'll be able to see something like ramp, for example. At a minimum, it can do something like just make a kind of gradient. but they're showing you all these other things it can do. Imagine someone needs to make circles and they're like, oh, let me go right to the ramp top. It's kind of strange, but it can do it, right? So and basically what they're doing is saying the gradient is actually white to white, and make the gradient in a circular pattern, right? So now you've got a circle. So it is interesting to see that you can use different operators in kind of unorthodox ways, or you can just come up with your favorite uses for these and then do that. You don't have to know everything. It's just use the ones that work for you. The other thing is, if we open the palette, you will find things like, for example, there's kind of a very famous, I guess, thing that we would use TouchDesigner for, which is feedback. And so there's a feedback operator that allows you to kind of make blur effects, or have a kind of effect that's like, I think probably most people at this point haven't experienced this, but if you take an analog video camera and point it at the monitor that it's showing its results on, you get this weird, trippy kind of like forever MC Escher thing going on, and that's feedback. So you can do that in TouchDesigner. This is what I want to explain to you, is that there's a feedback top, but there's also a feedback, where is it? Again, finding things is the problem, but there is a feedback component. And what we can do is, if we drag this component out, we'll see that it looks like just any other operator. It looks like a top, in fact, because it's got a purple input and a purple output. But you'll notice it is not purple, right? Like this is purple, but this one's gray. So this is a component. If we go back to our list of families, you can see that components are gray. So this is a component, meaning that you can double click on it and enter into that component. And the way you know where you are, because you can go multiple layers deep, is by looking at this list here. So it shows me that I'm in project 1, which is in the root of my project. And then within project 1, there's a feedback comp, which is where I am now. And you'll see that what they're doing is actually just using the feedback top, but they've added some other things in here to make it a little easier to use. So sometimes taking one of those components is really handy. I would say this is an easier way to do feedback than doing it yourself. It's not much different. But what we don't want to do is go into composites and start just like finding weird, cool effects, because what you end up getting, some of these are real basic, but some of them, someone, put a lot of work to make it look a certain way. And what you'll end up doing is making kind of like, if you're in Photoshop, making artwork by just applying filters, right? Which feels very, it's just going to be derivative, no pun intended, since it's the company that makes TouchDesigner. But, you'll be making work that's derivative and maybe just really is responding to what you think is available in here. The nice thing about TouchDesigner is you can really make anything, but you start to get locked in if you start just saying, well, this is what I can do because this is what's available to me. It's better to understand how to actually construct these things yourself. So let's move on to, components. I described components there. Let me describe something else about components. Let's say I have a favorite setup here that maybe I am going to add that, I'm going to add an edge top. So it's, let's see what that looks like. Not that interesting. But let's say I combined some things. I think maybe it's also because I've adjusted the contrast and brightness. I'm not sure. Yeah, there we go. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, that's kind of interesting. So let's say this combination of operators was something that was like a favorite of mine. You can highlight them both, and you can right click out here and say collapse into, where is it? Collapse selected. So what it's done is it's made a base component, and I can go into it and see what it's doing. And it automatically created an in top and an out top. And that's because, let me go back up. That's because it takes takes a top as its input and produces a top as its output. Now you might say, why does it say BAS here? Well, that's just the name of it. In fact, any of these tops or any operator, you can click here under viewer and it'll switch it off. I would say if your computer is really sweating and you don't necessarily need to see all of what's happening in all these operators, you can turn that off. Of course, you can also highlight a bunch of them and I think turn them all off at once. So that will save your computer some resources. I kind of like having this on because it's showing me what it's doing. And I can rename it as well. You can rename anything in here, but renaming a component feels like a requirement. My favorite filter. Okay, so I think that's all I wanted to tell you about components. I'm not going to show you how to make interfaces or anything like that. Well, I will show you one thing. So let's go back. I'm going to hit undo. The nice thing about undoing is it tells you what you undid and what's next to undo. That's really kind of an interesting thing. So I'm going to undo to where I didn't have the, where I didn't have the component there. And let's say I want to be able to change the black level, right? I will, this is the segue into chops, because we want to have these things happen maybe in an automated way or in response to something else. So let me show you just really quickly how you can use a comp slider to do a similar thing. So right here, we've got a slider, and I could slide it back and forth, but you can see it's not actually allowing me to. And that's because all of these have this blue, all these tops have this blue dot to show what's there. If I show more than one, it'll actually split the screen. But the other thing it has is this one on the right, which is called viewer active. So it does something different depending on what kind of operator you're in. But here, viewer active means that I can interact with this as a slider. Here, it usually means that I can kind of move the thing around. It's like you actually interact with what's in the operator rather than the operator itself. So same here. If I want to be able to use this as a slider, I have to choose viewer active. It's something we do so often that if I right click on, let me right click on here, viewer active is actually, okay, I might be crazy. Right click out here. Viewer active is actually a shortcut, A, toggle selected viewers active. So pressing the A key will turn it back and forth between viewer active. It's a very common thing to have to do. So let's say I want to make this slider, which appears to go from 0 to 1 as I slide it back and forth. I also could slide it here and you'll see it reflected in the slider itself. But I've essentially made an interface element right here. And what I want to do is actually make this the output, and I want it to change this slider here for black level. Now, this is where we get into chops. So let me pause and talk about the chop family. Okay, so chops, like I said, if all we want to do is apply Photoshop filters to images and videos, we could do that with some other tool. The reason why we're using TouchDesigner is because we probably want to make visuals or sound that evolve over time or that are interactive. Maybe somebody twists a knob on an Arduino and that sets off a chain reaction of events in the projection, or we create a whole unique image based on the current weather conditions in Little Rock, Arkansas, or maybe there's like an LED wall that changes based on live music that's happening in the performance space, right? So these are all things that we would do with TouchDesigner. To do anything really interesting with TouchDesigner, we have to use chops, channel operators. So let me give a real simple example. Before I go back to the slider, I wanted black level to go up and down, right? So let's see if we can make it happen in this kind of way, like a sine wave back and forth, nice smooth back and forth. I'll turn this on so we can see what it looks like as I do it, right? It's doing this. Not that interesting, but you get the idea. I'm animating something. So what I can do is hit tab to add a channel operator. And I'll use one, probably one of the most common channel operators is going to be LFO. And an LFO basically just goes back and forth. You can make it do different kinds of patterns. You can make a triangle wave. You can make a square wave, on off essentially. So let's say we want it to go this sine wave. And what I want to do is I want to connect this to that lever, that slider. The way that I would do that is there's a very particular way that we do this by choosing viewer active and then dragging this over to the operator I'm interested in. You'll see when I do that, the parameter window changes for that operator. And then I would drag it over to the parameter that I want to animate and then choose chop reference. There are uses for these others, but they're almost never used. It's very specific cases. Chop reference is the one we'll use almost always. So you can see it's kind of working, but it's doing a little bit of a weird thing. It only goes halfway up and it gets stuck at some point at 0. And that's because it's going from 0. If I just drag this, it'll break the connection. I just didn't want to freak you out with the flashing. But this is going in the wrong kind of range. Now we can, if we click, I'm clicking here and it's not changing to that parameter. Well, that's because it's in viewer active mode. So let me change and click there. And now I could change the amplitude and the frequency. I'll show you how to do that. And then I'll go back to what it was before. So what I really want is for the amplitude, I don't want it to be, well, so first of all, what is the range that it's going to? It's hard to tell. So let's see if we can get a look at that. And for that, I'll hit tab while I'm dragging. I will use the trail chop. This is a handy one. This shows you over time what that output is. So you can see it's going from -1 to 1. So that's actually too high, right? Like it's like one here and one here. This is like from top to bottom, it's too high. So let me click over here and I'll change this to 0.5, which should give me an amplitude from, like above and below. The total is 1 unit. But it's obviously is going negative. I don't want it to go negative. So then I'd have to bump up the offset so that it nudges it upward by 0.5. This is a really common thing, right? This is how we get from negative 0.5 to negative 0.5 to 0 to 1. There's an easier way too. So I'm gonna do that. Let me go back here and just choose reset. I wish there was a way to reset all the parameters, but I don't think there is. Okay, so I've reset it and now I'm back at -1 to 1. What I can do is actually use another super common chop, which is called math. And I will add a math here. And one of the most common things that we do is just use it to change the range, not to actually do any specific math, but to say, figure out the math for me. It currently goes from -0.5 to 0.5. I'd like it to go from 0 to 1. And so what you get is, let me just add this to the trail, and we'll see that we have a different range. Now it's hard to tell, they look the same, but the axis or the legend here on the left is different. If I right click on this, let's see, viewer active, and then right click, and what I should be able to do is see them on top of each other. Forget how this works. All channels on a single. So now we can see it's different. That doesn't look right. Getting it from, well, it's, oh, sorry. That's because I forgot that no, now I'm confused. It should be going, everyone who knows TouchDesigner is watching this and saying, you moron. Okay, let me just add the LFO again to try and avoid troubleshooting in real time. And, I'll be honest, I'm not totally sure. This should be, because it's going from -1 to 1. And I want it to go from, instead, to go from 0 to 1. So now you can see the two of them together. Sorry about that. 0 to 1 instead of -1 to 1. So the yellow one is the second one. So that is really useful. And now it's actually in the range that I want. So what I could do is just drag this over and, viewer active, drag it over to level and change the black level based on that. So again, I'll turn this on and you can see now the effect is less flashy. Okay, here's one other thing. By the way, you can see when a connection's made using a chop reference, it has this dotted line. So it's not just an invisible thing that we don't know about. We also can see it moving here. If I click on the plus sign, it shows me that it is actually a little bit of Python. This bit of Python is saying address the operator that's named here, math1, and get channel 1 from its list of channels. There's only one here, channel 1. So that's it. I could actually just type that in. That works as well. So again, I told you if I drag this, it will break the connection, and we can see that happen here. Now, let me just go back a little bit. I'm going to delete the trail just so we're not having to look at it. And actually, I'm going to delete the math. To do that, I have to turn viewer active off. So this is in the wrong range, right? And maybe, what I've done is I've just connected it directly to the black level. What I'm about to explain is why we use the null chop. It's a probably the most used operator that we use is the null chop. And why do we use it? So this is in the wrong range. Let's say I wanted to add a math. Well, to do that, I have to break that connection somehow, go back from viewer active, add a math, and then make the connection again. What we typically do is before we make that connection using a chop reference is we add a null. Nulls have no impact on your computer at all. They're free. Essentially, they don't require any extra processing power. It's basically just like, using an extension cord in a way. This now becomes the thing that we use to change the black level. But then I would say, oh, that's off. That's wrong. Well, now I can just insert a math in here. So it gives me the space to be able to add other things before in this kind of chain of logic or processing and still have this as the end result. That's why we use a null chop. There are also null tops, which is very common to use as well, but the null chop is really just something we use all the time. So again, I will change this to from -1 to 1 and make it go from 0 to 1. The other thing I can do is I can do some actual math here. Maybe I want to multiply it times 0.5. So that actually changes it as well. But we'll look at that again later. So this is how you actually make a connection between a channel of data and a parameter. It's a very common thing. We do it all the time. I'm going to delete these. Not all of those. Delete these. And it's complaining because this now doesn't actually have a reference. How do I know what it's complaining about? If I ever see a red X there or an exclamation point, I can click with the middle button again and it tells me the error. None type object is non-scriptable. It's a really bad error and it's something that we see often. Anytime you see none type, it basically means it's referencing something that doesn't exist. And so if we look here, we've got some bit of Python and it's referencing something called null1. It doesn't exist in our network editor and that's why it's complaining. I will actually just drag this and now it doesn't matter. It got rid of that. Okay, so the last thing is I just wanted to show you how you can have this change the level, the brightness level. So again, we've got a connection here. We can make this go to a null. And in the same way, I can drag that over here and make the connection to black level using a chop reference. So now as I drag, let me viewer active, as I drag this back and forth, I'm actually changing the value of this parameter. So as you can see, hopefully it's making sense that this really is a programming tool. This is the same as if you were using P5.js or something that is kind of a traditional sort of coding tool versus using this graphical flow-based, node-based interface. And it does all the same things. So you can see now that I've added a math in there that those are the kinds of things you might do with a programming language. Also making connections. Essentially, we've got variables, like we've got a place where we store something and then refer to it. This is basically how we do programming, and chops are where the programming stuff really happens, besides actual Python code, which we also can use. But I did want to kind of go over the most used chops. Again, I showed you trail. That shows you what a channel is doing. And also, if we hit tab here, we'll see, again, we have certain ones are darker. Those are the generators. I would say things like LFO, noise, those are sources of information, sources of channel data. If I click noise here, what you'll see is it's actually just a kind of, it's a different thing. It doesn't have that back and forth. It's not a value that's changing. And this is just actually showing you how channels work in TouchDesigner. It's a little complicated to understand in the beginning, but and it doesn't matter too much to us right now, but it's worth understanding that these are actually individual samples. So if I zoom in, you can see these are actually individual samples. Essentially, each one of these is a different value, right? Like over time. So, normally if I'm looking for noise, I really just want a random number. And we can go over here to common and choose time slice. And now that's what we get. So it depends on the data, and I'm not going to go too much into multi-sample chops, but that is a thing, right? Like, and maybe I'll show you one example, which is pattern. So let's go to pattern, and what we can see is this is a sine wave. And again, if I right-click and viewer active, right-click and say dots per sample, I can see that these are all individual samples. Now, this is over time. How much time? This much time. It's 1,000. It goes from 0 to 1,000 or 0 to 999 probably. And that's how many samples there are. Now, I can also say, well, there's only 5. So now you can see what's happening. We actually have 5 separate samples. It's the same channel, but there are different samples within that channel. So this is a little more advanced, honestly. I feel like it's a basic thing to understand, but as I've been working with it with beginners to TouchDesigner, it feels like understanding multi-sample channels is not as important as just getting a channel of moving data, which we can do with noise by just changing to the changing to time slice on. Okay. What else? I think other things that are really useful are the param or parameter chop, which this is useful because, how do we get something into this? I want to get the parameters of, let's say, the level top. Well, how do I do that? There's no input here. And plus, this is a top. We can't make a top smash into a chop anyway, unless it had a purple input here. But basically, it's looking for which operator we're talking about. Now, we can type in a name here. We can type in level 1. And now you can see there's a dotted line here. And so what we should get is all the parameters from level 1 showing up here. Built in off, if I turn that on, then I'll start to see that all of the parameters that have to do with level 1 are showing up here as channels. Pretty interesting. Let's say I wanted to get one particular channel out of there. For example, let's click here and change, well, let's look at black level, right? So we've got the black level, and as I zoom out a little bit, as I move my lever here, you can see the black level here changes, and also the black level channel over here changes. So I'm able to get all of the parameters of this operator as channels. That feels useful. How do I get just one out of this list? Well, this is where the select chop is another really common one. Let's say I want to select just that one called black level. I can actually type in channel names, black level, and it'll just show me that one. Star means everything. And another thing we can do is just say star G. That means anything that ends with G. So we can start to filter down the number of channels if we've got too many. Okay, let's see, what else is there? Parameter, speed. So just in thinking about LFO and noise as sources of channel data, real simple numbers that can come across. Speed is another one. With speed, again, this is like a name that doesn't necessarily make sense, and the description doesn't even make sense. Let's look at the description. It says speed converts speed units per second to distance units over a time range. Yikes, it's hard to understand what that might mean, but what we can do is, to demonstrate, we can use a count chop, another handy one. This basically is going to give us a number that increases every time we send in a pulse. So this says channels to count, reset, and increment value are the 3 inputs. Let's add an LFO. And this LFO is not, we're not going to do a sine wave like this. We're going to do a square wave, which just means on, off. Of course, I don't like this -1. It should just be 0 to 1. So let me change this to be 0.5, and the offset should be 0.5. So now we've got 0, 1, 0, 1. So every time it turns to 1, that's a pulse. It's going to increase the count here. Now, what happens if I take that and feed it to the speed? What we actually get is this kind of increasing number rather than just the individual, bumping up of numbers. For almost all of these, we have a way to just stop them. I can just change this to play off. And because I've set the speed, essentially, it's still going at that speed of 20. So that's what speed can do for us. That's one really practical use of it. I'm sure if we go into the snippets, you'll see that there are tons of uses for speed. But again, this is one that we would use pretty often. A last one is trigger. So let's look at a trigger with this same LFO that goes on and off. So I'll just delete these. What I'd like is to, every time that goes on and off, I'd like a different kind of shape. I'd like it to kind of, well, let me try and do it right now. You can see it's not just going 0 to 1. There's an envelope to it, meaning that it has different components to it that are attack, sustain, delay, and release. This is something that ADSR, attack, decay, sustain, release. This is something you'd be familiar with if you deal with sound at all. And basically, this is saying anytime a pulse comes in, it's going to follow this attack, decay, sustain, release sort of path. Well, let's see what ADSR. If we take a look at this, this is what ADSR looks like. There's an attack phase, a decay, a sustain, which is the time when it's a 1, and then when it goes from 1 to 0, there's a release. So we can control kind of what the shape is. And again, I said this is familiar to sound because we can change the volume by using an envelope. We can change the pitch. We can make different drum sounds by shaping it. And we can do the same thing here. It sounds kind of abstract right now, but this is actually a really useful thing to be able to change something using a more sophisticated kind of curve to it than just on and off. Let's do a real quick example with a top. I'll just make a circle, and I will, again, make a null here because that's how we normally make connections between things. I'm going to do viewer active, drag this over here, and change the radius. I don't have to change one or the other. I can just drop it right on radius, and that'll change them both. So we can see the shape that it has is changing in an interesting way. It's not just a 0 or 1. And again, this is a reason why we use nulls, because it looks too big. Well, maybe I'll just insert an operator, choose math, and what I'll do is just make it a little smaller. How can I do that? Maybe multiply it times 0.5. So you can see that this is the beginning of making interesting kind of animations, not animations, but animating parameters in interesting ways. I think, like there are lots of other chops. I mean, really, to me, chops are where all the fun is. And this is where we deal with kind of numbers and actually make things animate or become interactive. Another thing that we'd probably have to do pretty often is let's add an LFO and just get some number that's ever changing. But what I actually want is to kind of pick up a random number every so often. So between -1 and 1, I just want to have a number get kind of snapshotted. So this is, again, another very popular chop, which is hold. Now, what it's done is it just froze it at that moment. And until I hit pulse, it won't recapture or make another snapshot. Now, it has an input here that is also a trigger that can pulse it, or I can use pulse here. So just to show you that there's a couple ways to do this. One is I'll add an LFO again, and this one will just be a square wave. Again, I would like it to be 0 or 1, so I'll make the amplitude 0.5 and the offset 0.5. So I've got 0, 1, 0, 1. That is going to be the pulse that determines that tells it to kind of snapshot what's happening there. Now, why is it not changing? Well, because the timing matches. This is happening every second, and this is happening every second. So I could probably change this frequency to something bigger, and you'll see that the numbers are actually changing. So they were just kind of in sync. That's why it was looking like it wasn't moving. But again, I'll show you another way that this can happen. I'll disconnect. I'll make a null here because that's how I do it before I make a connection to a parameter. But I'll take this and drag it over here and actually connect it to the pulse button. So it actually pushes the button. That does the same thing. So, I'm not trying to show you multiple ways to do things, but that is a very different logic and something that we come across all the time. Sometimes there's an input, sometimes we actually want to control a parameter, and in this case, we could do either. Because I think chops are the most useful things, for the kind of things that I would do in creative coding, because I'm not trying to make really complex 3D animations or particle systems or things. At the beginning, we probably want to do things with images or shapes, things that we start off with in something like P5. So it's worth spending a lot of time in chops and starting to understand how you deal with logic. So, math, LFO, hold, these are some really common ones. And I just want to show you some other ones that are really used a lot. So one would be logic, which actually allows us to do a lot with like whether something is, we could kind of take two different inputs and output a different answer or a different piece of data based on the combination of the two. We've got logic. We've also got expression, which allows us to do a Python expression and basically say that, for example, let's take a count. And just to remind you, we have the trail here, so we should be able to see what's coming in. Let me, why is it complaining? Let me middle click, and it says not enough sources. So it needs to be counting. So let's just actually take this and feed it in here as the counter. So here it is. That's what the count looks like, right? Now, there are a couple things here. One is, let's say I wanted to know what that is, but there's a very common thing in programming, which is to get the modulus. So if we said, what's this number modulus 10? it'll keep the number in the range 0 to 10. We could do that with a math shop, but also this is just a good example. So let me feed this to an expression. And you can see right now the expression is not doing anything interesting. It's just giving the value back. But I can type some Python here. What is that? Modulus 10, meaning divide it by 10 and give me the remainder. So this is a way that you can do math right in there. You can also do all kinds of other expressions that are just kind of free expressions. So if you're used to coding, rather than trying to cram everything into an operator that has Python code, you might say, well, actually, I'm just going to dip into a little bit of Python for the moment to give me the answer I want instead of finding a bunch of different operators to do it. So expression can be handy that way. Also, in terms of like kind of doing signal processing on these numbers, this is a number that's just stepping up like that. But let's say I wanted to actually smooth it out. So, or maybe the random number is good for this. So I can use something like lag. And if we look at this, let's take this out of the mix and just show these two. Okay. So what we've got is we've got this number that's changing all the time. And then we feed it through a lag. That's the yellow one. We can see that it's actually kind of like a sloppier version of it. I can change how much lag there is. And you'll see that at some point I can actually make it start to be a totally different shape. Pretty interesting. So there are all kinds of options for this as well. We can change the acceleration here so that it actually is kind of like a smoother version of it. There are other ways to do this. One other one would be filter. And again, this is like a really common one that we would use. Adding a filter here. We have different ways that we can filter the data, but let's look at what that looks like. So this is interesting. Filtering that square wave actually with the default settings turns it into something like a sine wave. It's not quite a sine wave. And of course, we can change all the options here. So this is pretty interesting in terms of like dealing with this really rigid sort of way of getting data and then turning it into something smoother. These are some options, lag and filter. There are tons of other ways of dealing with channels. If you have a lot of channels, for example, what's a good example of having a bunch of channels? Well, we actually saw that with parameter. So let me do that just to not add more. But I've got an LFO here. I can actually just drag this, I believe, onto the operator. And if I turn off built-in, now I've got all these different channels. There are lots of things I can do when I have many channels of data. I can decide to combine them together using math. I can start to rename them or combine them, select different ones. I showed you the select operator. So there are actually tons of ways to deal with multiple channels, and it's a thing we do all the time. But there are so many of them that I think it's not worth listing them. But the ones that we've gone through so far are some of the very common ones. The last thing I'm going to show you in channels, or actually the last two things. One is audio. So first of all, there is audio file in, which we'll just take an audio file in and we don't hear anything. And that's because we actually have to make it go to an audio device out. Oh, no, you can't hear that. Okay, so you can't hear that. So that's one option. And then also, don't ever try to filter, even though this is channel data, it's channel data with a lot of samples to it. So trying to filter that will make your computer potentially crash. But I could insert an operator like an audio filter. And that will allow me to do things like, for example, do a low pass filter, high pass filter, all kinds of things like that. Another really useful thing is to, if I right click on this, analyze. We can do analyze. So if I do analyze, this does work okay with this, a lot of these samples. It's not a problem for it. It's averaging them out. So now I actually have like a channel 1 and a channel 2 with just a single sample that moves back and forth rather than all these different samples. It's averaging them out. A real common one is to do RMS power, which kind of gives you the volume. And so this could be if you're trying to detect someone clapping or something, this would be like a really useful one. And of course, we only care about one of these channels. So I think what we'd have to do at that point is select which one we're interested in. We may also be able to turn this into mono from here. Yeah, right there. So now I've got one channel. I also mentioned that audio there, so we can also get audio device in. So this will get it from my microphone, and also audio movie. So I mentioned that if you do a movie file in, it doesn't actually give you the audio, but this is how we can get the audio from the movie to play. The last things I'm going to show you with Chops are that we can get information from or channel data from external devices. So again, filtering through this list, it'd be great if there was a category that was like devices. An Oak device is an AI camera. There's Microsoft Connect. There's the Leap Motion, which allows you to wave your hands and it detects where your fingers are, things like that. MIDI devices, keyboards, things like that would be MIDI, and even just the mouse and the keyboard. So these are all, again, in a category that we could kind of start to make sense of this big list and see that a lot of them have to do with getting information from external sources. So another way to get information from the mouse, for example, is by using the panel chop. So here's the panel chop. You can see actually if we open the perform window, can we still see the network? Okay, I think, all right, I'm not going to, we can see the network and the network editor and the perform window at the same time, but I'm not going to show you that right now. But we can get information about like not only where the mouse is moving, because if we look at the mouse in chop, it gives us a limited bit of information, just TX and TY, although we can also get the left button. I can just say LB or make up some name and it'll make a channel for left button. And when I click it, goes from 0 to 1. But you can actually get a lot of information here from the panel chop, which tells you other things like whether you're scrolling and all kinds of other stuff. Okay, so let's highlight everything and delete it all. I think at this point, it's probably useful for you to try something out, right? So just given what we have, can you make a circle using the circle top? Can you make a circle move around in the X and Y orientation in random ways? And then can you get it to kind of do the DVD screensaver thing that moves around, and bounces off corners? I don't know. That could be an interesting challenge just with the little bit of information that we have already. Okay, the last family I'm really going to show is the DAT family. Now, I did mention that we can write Python, and unless you're a Python person, I'm not. I know lots of programming languages, but Python's just one that I don't really know well. And I know the basics, but actually that's plenty to get by in TouchDesigner. TouchDesigner uses Python mostly to access bits of TouchDesigner. Although you can bring in a crazy complex TouchDesigner library, I'm not sure what they call them, libraries, I guess, that does something fancy, and then cram it into TouchDesigner. I think most of the time where you would use it is just in things like expressions that show up in different places, or some of the things that I'm going to show you right now, which is not really that complicated, even if you don't know Python. So let's look at something that's really common, which is chop exec. So let's say we have a, well, let's look back at chops for a second. We've got something called OSC out. Now, if you're not familiar with OSC, it basically is a network protocol, allows you to send messages back and forth. And what you could do is actually, if we have an OSC out there and an OSC in over here in the same network, we can actually send messages from this one to that one. Let's use an LFO and just make it send that data back and forth. So not back and forth, from here to there. Now, the interesting thing is this could very easily be on TouchDesigner on a different computer, and it will receive it over the network, which is pretty cool. Now, one thing is this is a good example of how we can use chop exec. So let's say we wanted to actually, well, let's do a little bit more here. Let's just go back to our other example of an LFO that is a square wave and has some bigger frequency to it, different frequency than this. And we'll use a hold. So we're doing this kind of sample and hold move where we get that and that and that. So that random number is what we're sending over to the other OSC end. So I'll just make these between 0 and 1. Okay, so let's say I'm on the other computer or even on this computer. I want to receive this data from OSC and I want it to influence the location or the size of a circle. Again, this is like my go-to when I'm testing something out, size of a circle or move it around. So there it is. And again, I will just make a null here, viewer active, and then drag it over to the circle and the radius, make a chop reference. So you can see every so often it's changing the size. Again, this is not the right size, so maybe I will do a little math magic and make it a tenth of the size. So I will insert an operator, math, and just tell it to divide by 10, which means multiplying times 0.1. Okay, so we've got a different size every time. It's a little small, half. Okay, so now there's something interesting here, which is every so often some bit of data comes in on OSC in, and let's say I wanted to actually do something with that data. I want to do something in response to a number that's coming in. I can do it here using operators, and sometimes that's the way to go. Sometimes we'd want to use something called a chop exec. So I will choose dat, chop exec. And what this does is if I drag this onto the name of the chop here, it's made a connection between this chop and a bit of Python code. So there are different ways that we can edit the Python code. I'm just going to make it bigger and do viewer active for now, but there are ways that you can, if you have a lot to edit, you can do it in a separate window or in an editor of your choice. But basically what we've got here is chop exec has all of these different options. When the value of this channel changes, it's going to, or when the value of anything in this chop changes, because we're saying any channel in this chop, it's going to call this function called onValueChange. This is a callback. So it's going to, every time something changes in here, it's going to call this function. It's interesting. So this is an opportunity to show you maybe about another DAT, which is a table DAT. So this is kind of like a little spreadsheet, and we can use this to store information. There's lots of things we can do with tables, and especially if we have data coming in or we have something coming in from a website, maybe we want to deal with that as like a table of data. In this case, let's say we actually want to keep track of all the different values that have come in. I can say here on value change, add a little bit of Python, and this is the most common thing that we would do in TouchDesigner in Python, which is to say address a specific operator. I showed you this before. So that for that operator, I want to do something. I don't know what. I want to append a row here with the value that is coming into this function. So this is a function, and it's got the channel. I can use the channel information. I can do the channel number. I can use sample index. This is not a multi-sample chop, so it's not going to matter. Val is the current value. So the value that caused this callback to be called. That's probably the thing I want, right? I want to make a new row in here that is equal to val. So how do I do that? Well, let me click on table and then choose Python help and see if there's something in here that can help me. If I jump down to the methods section, there are no methods. Okay, wait a minute. That sounds weird. Members are variables essentially associated with a table. But then down here, I'm not sure why there's two okay. I wonder if this members and methods is specific to table DAT, but the DAT class in general has its own set of members and methods. That's what we're looking at here. So there's one in here. If I jump down, this is modifying table content. I feel like that should be at the top, but whatever. There's one here that says append rows and shows you some examples. So you can append a row with some information. I think that's all you have to do. Let's try it. So append, obviously capitalization matters, and also the indentation matters. If you try and do this, it will not work. That's not how Python likes things. It has to be indented properly. So append row, and I want to just append the value. Now it won't actually run it until I click out of here. But when I do, what you see is it's that number coming in is getting added to the rows of this table. Pretty cool. So now I could reference that somewhere else. I could make a graph of it or whatever I want to do. Okay, so, or maybe play this back or don't know. So this is kind of an arbitrary example, but you can imagine that there's some power to be done to had here. So I'm going to turn that active off so it doesn't keep adding to it. But that I think, I might just stop there because I guess one other useful piece of information is that you can use lookup to get specific rows from here. So for example, if I want to look up, how do we do this? This is the index. This is what we want to look up. So let's move over here. I've got my table. This is what I want to look up. And then let's say I just add a count. And maybe I will add a button. So we haven't seen this yet, but basically buttons, can be, it can send out a 1 when you push it down. In this case, I want it to be momentary, so it just gives me a little trigger when I push it. But if I add that to my count, what will happen is when I push this button, it will increment it. Pretty cool. So I will take this and make that my index. I think I put that in the wrong place. That should go there. Index should go here. Okay, now I've got a problem because I can't make a chop go to a dat. So this is where we start to see that there are different ways to go between families. So again, I dragged and hit tab, and dat doesn't show the long list. It only shows me the things that are possible. So chop to dat is a thing. So what it's done is it's taken this number that was a channel data, and it's turned it into basically a cell in a table. Now I can take that and make it my index. So let me hit the button. It's basically looking up in this table, item number 7 starts at 0, 0, 1, 2, 3. You can also look up things by the row name or the column name. It can really start to look like a spreadsheet. So hopefully this gives you a sense of like between scripting, making things run some Python in response to something happening somewhere else in the network, or storing things as tables, looking them up. This is probably the most useful parts of the DAT family. And again, I think it's worth you trying something out with the DAT family. It's so kind of broad and abstract at this point. I might point you to a video that I made that shows how to get some weather data from the internet. And that uses DATs pretty extensively because it involves a little bit of Python and it involves storing it in a table, looking up JSON data from the internet and putting it into a table. So it's pretty handy. I would say look at that video next if you want to try out the DAT family. Okay, so that's it. That's my whole distilled down TouchDesigner tutorial for just getting started with creative coding. It purposefully excludes all of the stuff about making crazy, dazzling eye candy, doing things like particle systems, even just dealing with 3D. If I were starting out in something like P5, I probably wouldn't be going to those things initially. I'd be thinking like, how do I get images to show up? How do I get them to switch? How do I get things to move on screen in response to something else? A classic thing is like for the work that we do is like, how do I get a sensor and connected to an Arduino to get something to happen in TouchDesigner? So that would be another video that I have that's just really short, like how to get an Arduino to talk to TouchDesigner. That would be something to look at. But this is, I think, enough information to get you started dealing with 2D images, movies, text, which are also just really easy because you've seen how to use tops. There are text tops and also shapes. So those are the kinds of things that we would probably do in beginning creative coding projects. And that can get us really pretty far. So mostly it's the challenge of trying to figure out how to puzzle piece channel data together. So getting really used to chops is the thing to do, in my opinion. And even if you planned on doing a lot with some of the families and some of the operators we didn't talk about, chops will definitely be a part of it. So hopefully it's also explaining to you that out of the million operators that are here that all have similar names and they're all one word, so it's really hard to tell. They're not categorized. There are just really like a smaller number that you need. And so it doesn't have to be as intimidating as it looks once you figure out that the ones that you need are the ones that you need and the others maybe come up rarely. Now, this is the extra bonus part of the video where I actually show you the thing that we didn't really talk about, which is kind of important. Like, how do you get things to show up on a projector? Because it so far hasn't worked that way. So let me just do a movie file in. I'll get the banana, that's the default thing here, and I'll make it go to an out. That is it. That's all I need to get things to show up in the perform window. But you can see this isn't filling up my screen. So what I need to do is go back to the slash. This is the root of the project. So I'll click there and you'll see actually your project is in this component. There's a separate component called perform. There's also a table over here, which is kind of interesting. It's got a bit of information. This is the name of your project and there's the file name. So they're using tables here to store information that'll be accessed elsewhere. This perform window is its parameters are how you can tweak how it looks on the output. So for example, turning the borders off so you don't have to see the title bar and stuff. And then also the biggest thing is opening size fill. That will fill the whole screen with it. I think I'm using OBS to record this video and I think it won't show anything, but let's try it. So if I hit open as perform window, okay, yeah, it shows up black in OBS, but it did work over here. And also you can open it as a separate window so that it shows up it doesn't remove the network editor. Now it doesn't work when it's filled necessarily, but if I just say automatic and then choose open as separate window, see I've got the window here. I can't drag it because I turned borders off, but I can turn them back on. And now I've got my perform window. One other thing I'll tell you is that if you zoom in, it will enter into that thing. And if you zoom out, it'll go out of it. I suggest you never do that because it can be quite confusing. Double click instead, and that'll be much more manageable. Okay,